basically, let me just talk a little bit about this budget. This is now the fifth cut budget in a very long recession. Um, in this time, the city funds and budgets shrunk about 20%. As I said, we've cut over 500, I think it's 537 positions over the last 4 years. We have done a lot of one-time things, sold things. There are not many left. There's still one left. But we're trying to take this opportunity. Mr. Euwell's a very experienced city manager and administrator. We're trying to take this opportunity to try to clean up the baseline of the budget so it's very clear what all the expenses are. We're trying to make some decisions that will be good for the long term and not just the short term, so that the city of Oakland, its residents and its employees, can have some sense of what the budget will be on the long run. And immediately after we finish this budget, I thought we were going to do some PowerPoints. We can't do them. All right, so I have to point old-fashioned way. After we do this baseline budget, we're still going to have to talk about the redevelopment budget, still waiting to see what happens at the state. We're still going to have to talk about our capital budget, which has almost no funding. And we're still waiting for the federal and the state cuts. So that's sort of, this is the baseline budget. That's what we're trying to resolve today. And these are still the additional things that are up in the air that we have to either hear from the council about. Or we have to hear from the state or the federal government on. So it's not the end. We're going to be in budget season for at least a couple of months. So what we laid out today together, and I'm going to go over it briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Euwell, is a series of principles. We really wanted to try to be fair, to spread the pain, to have a sense of shared sacrifices. So there are some cuts that are going to happen whatever the scenario of funding is. We've reorganized the city. We've eliminated some departments. We've literally flattened the organization. There are some cuts that we're going to make whatever the income scenario is, that we need to do that. There are requests to the unions, and all of our unions are in bargaining, including the two who have closed contracts, the fire department and the police. We're asking our employees to contribute somewhere between 10 and 15%. We are also making an appeal to the city council they had passed earlier a parcel tax, assuming that Jerry Brown was going to have a June election. I'm asking them now to do that as a mail election. Unfortunately, if they do it now, we won't know the results until we already have started the fiscal year. So no matter what happens, there will be some cuts, additional cuts in July and August that we may be able to roll back later in the fall. And so we're asking everyone to give some. In this budget, we're asking all elected officials to take a 15% cut. We have tried in some cases, if you look at budget scenario A is the worst case scenario. This assumes that we don't have a parcel tax or it fails, and that our employee groups make no contributions. So it's very likely that it will be somewhat better than this worst case scenario, but this gives you a pretty good look of what it would mean. And for those who know me, what it would mean is that we wouldn't even have enough money to do the baseline for the library Measure Q. That is, we couldn't maintain a library budget of $9 million. That would mean that we'd lose $11 million in Measure Q funding and would have to close almost all of our libraries except for a handful of main libraries out the city. And if you know me, that will be the last option ever, and I was very reluctant to even put on it, but that's how bad the budget would be if we get no additional contributions from employees and if we get no additional taxes from our citizens. So that's the worst case scenario. The Measure B scenario, the B budget, is basically if we get some contributions from our employees, and the budget C is basically if we get contributions from both the citizens of Oakland through a parcel tax and contributions from our employees. That's obviously a much better scenario, but even under that scenario, we'd lose 80 positions. So under the worst case scenario, we'd lose 368 employees. Under the best case scenario, we would lose 80 employees. So basically, this lays out the highlights. It's not meant to be comprehensive. You can go online and see the details in order to get a better sense of that. One of the things that we do under the worst case scenario, and might have to do in some kind of combination of A and B, is to be fairer to our employees. We would ask that the leave without days be done on sort of a vacation basis and not close down the entire government. That way, safety employees would be included. All employees would be included, including fire and police. And what that would mean is that people would take the paid days without leave like a vacation, and that we would backfill. Particularly critical, and my commitment is to keep the number of patrol officers on the streets of Oakland the same, even if we have furlough of officers, and that would just be more fairly shared among all officers. That will mean in some cases, officers who are now doing desk jobs, more senior officers, would end up doing some days on patrol to backfill the patrol officers. And so, again, that's along our general idea of trying to make sure it's fair to all employees and that some employees don't get harder hit than others. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Euwell.
Thank you, Mayor. And there's not a lot that I need to add. I should just state at the very beginning, when Mayor Quan asked if I would come on board to help in this endeavor, her words to me at that time were, we really need to get very serious and firm and look very hard at how we're going to position the city so that it can return to good times. And so this budget does that. It's grounded in reality. We've been extremely conservative in all the assumptions, and so what you'll see in the text and in some of the numbers are that we expect a pretty flat revenue increase going into next fiscal year. That would include, of course, our highest revenue, that being the property tax, and we initially started out thinking a 2% decline, but in talking with the county assessor, we felt comfortable to at least keep it at a flat level going into next year. The same is true of sales tax and transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax. So every revenue is very conservatively stated, because what we don't want to do is to get into mid-year and then find out we have to go back and readjust the budget downward. Our hopes are that if there's any surprise, it's to the upside, and the city then has the ability to look at other issues. The other thing that we've attempted to do in this budget is to make sure that we keep public safety as a priority. And so based on the mayor's direction, we are actually hoping to bring back 20 police officers this year. And part of that objective is so that we can keep a steady level of officers, given the attrition rate that tends to happen in the city of Oakland. It's about 5 officers per month that we lose to retirement or to other departments. And so we factored that in so that in year 1 we bring back those at least 20 officers, and then in year 2 we began a academy for new officers, and so that's built into the budget. But this is a very difficult budget. It was $58 million that had to be addressed, $58 million in deficit. We've tried to be as frugal and conservative as we can, but there was at least one sale, as the mayor alluded to, that would allow us then to take those funds, split them up over 2 years, and to help to wean the city off of one-time revenue. Our objective is over the next 2 years to make sure that we eliminate what's referred to as a structural deficit, where our expenditures are outpacing the revenues, and to bring those to an alignment. And then moving prospectively, it's to try and stabilize the city's base and return it back to an organization that's stable, and we don't have to do this each year. And so that's the objective, and I think that we have a very good opportunity to achieve it.
We will probably, in the short term, be bringing back another 20 or so of the laid off officers because, one, we expect attrition, and secondly, we're moving back the cost of a police academy. And a police academy costs about $4 million. So by bringing back laid off officers rather than having to have a new academy to train new officers and pushing that back in the budget, we can still balance the budget and increase the number of officers that we have here at the beginning of the year. So questions. And the first question goes to Mr. Vargas in honor of his many years of service to Oakland.
Do you ever see something like the police department returning to what it once was?
I think that won't happen until after the recession. The city's income, first of all, last year was the first time in the written history of California that property taxes went down because of the real estate collapse, and that meant we lost about $28 million of income. I have to get that property tax base at least back up, and that's why I've asked for the 5-year emergency parcel tax, at least try to bring us up to what our revenues were in terms of our base services, and that includes the police. The police and fire are still 2/3 of our budget, and so until I can get that base budget up, I can't get them up to the height I had them after the passage of Measure Y.
Mayor, can you address whether or not you have any concerns about presenting 3 scenarios might in fact create some confusion just with residents on sort of what to look at and what
I'm hoping that we're going to explain it so clearly that you're going to explain it so clearly. I mean, we have to do this because I don't know if the city council is going to put a parcel tax on or not, or if it's going to pass, and I don't know where we'll be in negotiations. We're in negotiations at all or 5 different unions all at one time, and we're trying to get about the same goal, but we're getting there different ways with the different unions. So I have to tell people what all the scenarios are. I mean, he almost had to hold a gun to my head to do scenario A, where we close libraries, right? But to be honest, should there not be contributions, let me say it again, sorry, I didn't get enough sleep. To be honest, if we don't get contributions from our employees and we don't have a parcel tax, that's what scenario A is. And so I wanted to make it pretty clear what's at stake, and I think it's a more honest way of doing it. I could have taken a guess and just say, well, this is what I think is going to happen and put out one budget. But the reality, it's not all in my hands. Part of it's in the hands of the city council, and part of it will be in the hands of the citizens of Oakland. Yes, Cecily.
You talked about the negotiations with the unions. The police layoffs and the breakdown of the negotiations was last summer. It's coming up on a year now. At what point do you say, you've got to either make a contribution or we're going to start?
I think we did that all last year, but at least now they're willing to talk about it.
We're at the table, as the mayor said, with every labor unit in the city. But to answer your question, the council is scheduled to approve the budget on June 21st. And there's a fallback date toward the end of the month, I think the 28th of June. And so that's the time frame for us to at least have some understanding of what labor would like to contribute to help with this effort. But short of that, as the mayor said, we had to go into this realistically. Without knowing any of these other variables, we had to take a position of how do you cut $58 million. I will tell you, I've not been at the table with labor, but I talked to each of the groups offline, and I think that there's a willingness to assist, and we're just hoping for the best, but we have to be realistic and plan for the worst.